Hi, this is Gordon Russell, host of The Neutral Ground, the New Orleans Advocate's weekly podcast on the stories behind some of the stories that are making waves in South Louisiana this week. Thanks to our sponsors, Gardner Realtors, and thank you for joining us. Today we'll speak with crime reporter Ramon Vargas about the sex abuse crisis in the Catholic Church and a related scandal in the New Orleans Police Department. Jerry DiColo, our Metro editor, will join us to talk about the church's finances in tough times, which are bound to get tougher with the release of new names. And we'll talk to the Advocate's Pulitzer Prize-winning cartoonist, Walt Handelsman, about the slowly disappearing craft of editorial cartooning and how Walt gets his inspiration every day. Ramon Vargas covers crime for the New Orleans Advocate, and he's recently been writing about new revelations of sex abuse in the Catholic Church and some of its affiliates, such as Jesuit High School. Ramon, thanks for being here today.
Happy to be here.
So, Ramon, I think maybe the best place to start this story is with Ricky Windman because he connects a lot of these links. But tell us a little bit about who Ricky Windman is, who he is today, and how he figures into the sex abuse scandal.
Well, Ricky Windman today is a computer programmer in Texas. I met him last month when I contacted him and convinced him to open up about a $450,000 financial settlement that he reached with Jesuit High School. He was never a student there, but he grew up very close to the school and described being sexually abused by a maintenance man by the name of Peter Modica, and on one occasion by a priest named Neil Carr. And he kept that to himself.
This all happened in the 1970s?
So this happened in the mid-1970s, and he keeps that all to himself and kind of comes out as
a middle-aged man.
He's 53, and he comes out really motivated by the church abuse scandal, which has kind of heated back up since the Pennsylvania grand jury report from a couple of months ago. And really, I kind of thought that was it when he opened up about it, and I verified everything, and I told the story. But then keeping in touch with him, I end up learning that hadn't been the first time that he had been sexually abused. He had also been a witness in a notorious case from a little earlier in the 1970s that involved a group of Boy Scout leaders who were convicted of sexually abusing the boys that they were supposed to be mentoring as part of the Boy Scouts. And one of the victims was Ricky Windman, and he testified. He was a key witness in that case, and it ultimately sent several people to resulted in convictions against several people, including 4 Scoutmasters who were sentenced to prison for many years in 1977. Through his participation in that case, he ends up meeting a police officer by the name of Stanley Burkhart, who ended up developing a reputation as somebody who busted pedophiles. But he himself was eventually unmasked as a pedophile. He child pornography possession conviction. He at one point admitted to sexually abusing a young relative of his, and ends up in prison for a pretty long time. And one of his last incarcerations occurred in 2011 when Ricky Windman was a witness who revealed that after meeting him through the Boy Scouts, Burkhart had sexually abused him.
Wow.
And so this was sworn testimony. The judge evaluated the testimony and determined that Burkhart needed to stay behind bars for longer, and he was released in 2015.
So just to recap, you've got 3 totally distinct scandals, essentially, where sex abuse scandals, where this one child, who's now a grown man, Ricky Windman, was abused separately by the Scouts, by an OPD detective, and by Jesuit high officials. And all of these have been deemed to be credible in some way. Jesuit paid him. Burkhart was confined as a result of these allegations, and the Scoutmasters went to prison. It seems almost implausible or highly improbable that one child would be involved in all these things. But you've looked into this, and it appears to be true to the best of our knowledge. And does this kind of thing happen often?
It is not uncommon, is what I learned in reporting this story. Often is obviously a relative term, but speaking to a DA's investigator who was involved in the Boy Scout case to speaking to somebody on the kind of academic advocacy side. Both, one, you've got the DA investigator talking from his experience that Ricky Windman unfortunately wasn't the only person he had met who had been similarly assaulted by different people in a short amount of time in their youth, and then there's research that backs that up, according to the academic expert that I spoke to, in which once the type of trauma that a sexual assault leaves on a victim, leaves them exposed to
makes them more
someone else
someone
else coming and taking advantage of that. And it appears that Ricky Windman is one of them.
One of those cases. Well, I guess in looking at it another way, I mean, Stanley Burkhart is kind of connects these cases in a way, and he was a person, of course, who was assigned to. He was supposed to be helping Ricky Windman, and instead he allegedly abused him. And let's tell me a little more about Burkhart, because you had another story about him this week that was pretty remarkable. What did you discover about Burkhart?
Yeah, I mean, Burkhart, in speaking to Windman, one of the things that he mentions is that Burkhart would go around, would show him a picture of a boy who he claimed had been murdered and tossed into the and eventually found in the Mississippi River, and would kind of hold up his picture and say, if you don't do what I want you to do, that this can be you. Well, obviously, Windman's story got a lot of attention given the moment that we're in, and another person came forward, a man by the name of Vic Groomer, who described similarly meeting, having occasion to meet Stanley Burkhart, and Burkhart ends up sexually abusing him for several times over the course of a few years, and during a time frame that actually predated the abuse that Windman described. And same thing. One of the things he said is that one time, he showed him a picture of several pictures of kids that he claimed were murdered, but one specifically was a boy who had been found in the Mississippi River. He explained, and had been after he had been murdered, and though there wasn't an explicit threat, the
boys took it as one.
Vic Groomer took it as like, he's telling me that this can be me if I ever speak up about what happened. And of course he didn't speak up until Ricky Windman spoke up.
Just now, yeah.
And you've got decades that have passed since then. So of course I start digging through, to try to see like who this person might be, come across a story, and Ricky Windman had mentioned that the guy's name might be Eddie. Mm-hmm. And so I start going through, the public library database, and come to find a story written by Walt Philbin. Was of course I worked with him briefly very early in my career, but obviously one of the most renowned crime reporters I think to ever work in New Orleans. And he describes Stanley Burkhart talking about a boy by the name of Edward Wells, who was 17, who mysteriously turned up dead in the Mississippi River. And Stanley Burkhart described his theory that Edward Wells was having sex with men in exchange for money, and that possibly or most likely one of them killed him. Mm-hmm. An autopsy didn't show any signs of foul play.
It was ruled a drowning.
It was ruled a probable drowning, mm-hmm. According to the story. But Burkhart had the theory that he had been killed, and one thing that wasn't in the story, but as I visited with Walt to try to kind of see, hey, what as you always, what didn't you put in the story? Like, right. What can you tell me? Was it seemed that Burkhart was eager to put it out there that there had been a suspect in the murder, that he knew who had killed him. Walt, being the good reporter that he was like, I can't like throw someone's name out there without an arrest, without booking documents, some sort of warrant that right. like accuses someone of basically portrays that person as a murder suspect. So Walt never got a name. And so all of this gets back to the police, who have now revisited the case.
So they've just reopened this 1982 drowning case, or this...
It's revisiting it, kind of like giving it a fresh set of eyes, assign it to a cold case investigator by the name of Winston Harbin. It just indicates, obviously, taking a level of seriousness that maybe there was more to Edward Wells, maybe there wasn't, and certainly, the police have been made aware of the new, by Ricky Windman and by Vic Groomer, that they were two boys who had been assaulted, by Burkhart who had never come forward. And so all of that is leading into this investigation. At this point, I guess it's anybody guess where it may go, but it certainly, there are signs that they're taking this investigation very seriously.
And then this sort of raises a broader question of Burkhart's work generally. I mean, here's a guy who was put in charge of child abuse cases, and we now believe him to be a guy who abused children. Has the NOPD ever done any kind of an audit of his work to see if it seems like naturally one might suspect that he might have victimized other children. Has there been any effort to look through any of his cases?
To the best of my knowledge, no. Having spoken to people who were in the orbit of the Boy Scout case, who kind of knew Stanley Burkhart, they watched his rise and then saw his fall. They were never aware of such an audit. And then asking one, would you have liked to have seen one like that? The answer was yes. Mm-hmm. But to the best of our knowledge, none was ever done.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot for joining us today, Ramon. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.